Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I can see people are joining at a pace. It's great to see the participant numbers shooting up as we just press the on button for the webinar. So it's great to see so many people join in so quickly. And welcome everybody to the webinar. It would be great just while people are joining and logging into the Zoom process and while we're loading the webinar, if people could introduce themselves in the chat and maybe say the organisation that you're from. And because I'm from over in England, we're always interested in what the weather's like in different places around the world. So please drop in what the weather's like where you are. I can tell you over here in England, it's thunderstorms and lightning today. So if you see flashes of light and hear thunder rumbling in the distance, that's the great British summertime. So I can see people are joining the chat, which is great. Poonam is from UNICEF in India, the Mumbai office. So welcome, Poonam. Thank you for joining and for winning the first person to comment in the chat prize. Don't know what that prize is, but congratulations, you've won it. That's great. And Jenna from University of Connecticut, brilliant. Ruby, oh, the names are coming in now. So people in Strathclyde, always a wee bit overcast up there, I think, Ruby, right, in Glasgow. SOS Children's Villages, UK. Right, sunny in Cambridge. That's not too far from me. I can't believe that. That's incredible. And Mari from Hungary. This is great. People from all over. This shows the power of this global platform, right? The participant numbers are rocking up now, so we've got quite a few participants in the room. So it's probably a good time to get started in a minute or so, because we've got a jam-packed agenda for us. Hi Hugh, it's good to have you here, joining us from London. People from the Netherlands, Essex Uni. This is fantastic. Thank you all. Louise from Cardiff. That's great. Okay, so I think it's time for us to start the webinar. So as you can see from this slide, we're really lucky today that the webinar, we've got presenters from Argentina and also from Australia. So presentations that are going to be in English, but also in Spanish. So it's really vital. The first step is to get on the right audio stream for the presentation. So if that's a really key point at this stage. So if you have a look down at the globe sign at the bottom of your Zoom icons, and select that, you'll see that there's going to be a stream in English or in Spanish. So please do choose the language of your choice. That would be fantastic to start with. Okay, so everybody, I'm Justin Rogers, and I'm a lecturer in social work at the Open University, and I'm also part of the Centre for the Study of Global Development that's based at the Open University. And I'm really pleased to be the moderator of this session today. I've done some work with participatory research myself in this field, so I'm really pleased to hear from colleagues that are doing it as well, and keen to learn more from people today. What's really interesting is this webinar is hosted by the Transforming Children's Care Global Collaborative Platform. I'm sure many of you have signed up for it, but the aim of that platform is to establish a strategic sector-wide collaboration from global to local levels to strengthen children's care and care systems. And it's a really fantastic platform across the sector with people who are interested in care reform and ways to strengthen the care sector. So I do really encourage everybody to sign up using the link that's going to be posted in the chat to join that platform, engage in the various thematic areas that they've got and working groups that are working on different areas of care reform and improving care systems. And you can receive updates about future webinars there as well. So this is webinar number 13, lucky for us, number 13, but there's been 12 other fantastic webinars in this series that you can catch up with as well on that platform, which is great. As I say, the housekeeping for today's session, for those that have just joined in, the most important bit is to remember to select the correct interpretation for the presentations. But and thank you for everyone that's introduced themselves in the chat so far. It is being recorded as well, and the recording will be in Spanish and English as well. And we really want active engagement in this webinar today. So if you could use the Q&A to ask questions, and if you could also upvote on other people's questions, that would be fantastic, because then we can select the questions that are kind of most popular for people. Okay, thank you, Margot. So the agenda. So we've kind of had a bit of a welcome. I think I'll talk a little bit about
recording in progress.
Oh, the recording has just started, everybody. That's great. So just a quick kind of introduction to kind of, by the way of kind of setting the scenes about the webinar today. I wanted to briefly start by saying that there's many kind of different terms that you might hear when we talk about the involvement of people with lived experience in research. You know, we hear this term participatory research through to kind of peer-led or co-designed and co-produced studies. And sometimes these terms get used interchangeably, and they can mean different things to different people. And sometimes these approaches can be set up in kind of a hierarchy where you've got kind of consultation at the bottom, a bit like Arnstein's ladder of participation, if people have come across that theory, right the way through to kind of co-produced pieces of research where people are involved in every aspect of the research process, from setting the research questions through to writing up the research, through to disseminating the findings as well. And we've got some examples today that you're going to hear about, particularly the project in Argentina that you're going to hear from two of our presenters about, that really looks at the ways that people have been involved throughout that process in research. So we've got a fantastic opportunity to learn more about these approaches. I think that it's becoming kind of increasingly important, these participatory approaches, and there's a growing interest in it. And I think that shows by the amount of participants that we've got joining us today. And I think it's also important to add that whether a project's highlighted as being participatory or not, there are many kind of emerging and actually well-established researchers that come from a care experience as well, that use that kind of lived experience to inform whatever research that they're doing into alternative care, and it really kind of grounds and informs their research projects as well. So looking specifically at today's agenda, we're going to explore what some of the challenges and opportunities are for that participatory research in the context of alternative care, and specifically care leavers. So we're going to look at that today. And we're lucky to have three presentations that highlight how this happens in not only in academia, but also in non-governmental organisations as well, NGOs, because I know many of you are from the NGO sector. I'll introduce everyone as we go, but a brief outline at this stage of the presentations that we're going to hear from and the presenters we're going to hear from. So we've got Jade Patel doing the first presentation, and she's from Monash University in Melbourne. And Jade's presentation is going to focus on participatory methodologies and looking at how they can improve the quality of evidence and how they offer insights as well. And she's also going to look at different co-design methodologies that colleagues at Monash University have used in their work with care experienced consultants. Can you just go back a slide, Margot, please, just to give an idea of the other presentations. And then we're going to have presentations from our Argentinian colleagues. So Mariana, the founder of Doncel, is going to discuss the participatory methodology that they use to conduct regional mapping in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we're lucky to have Tatiana Lustig da Silva joining us as well, an emerging youth researcher that's looking at Latin America and the Caribbean regional network of Careleavers and the mapping that they undertook as well. So Tatiana is going to be sharing some of the key findings that came out of that work. After each individual presentation, we'll look at having 5 minutes of specific questions for each presenter. And then we'll bring everybody back for a wider discussion with the group, including the questions and questions from participants. So we're really keen for you to get started with the questions as soon as the presentations get rolling, and look to upvote other colleagues' presentations as well. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Jade shortly, but just to highlight that Jade, as I say, is a postdoctoral research fellow at Monash. She's a transdisciplinary practitioner researcher focused on care experiences and transitions from care. And Jade is currently researching care leaver representation in research and policy making, and is looking at developing a model for participatory information governance in alternative care. So over to you, Jade.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Justin, for that introduction. So it's really wonderful to be part of this session with international colleagues and respected organisations and youth researchers around the world. It's especially wonderful to be part of an event focused on Latin America. My step family are Mexican and Mexican American, so I'm a big fan of Latin culture. I'm very glad to be here. We can just go to the next slide, please, Margaret. And so just before I go on, I'd like to briefly acknowledge that I'm presenting from Wurundjeri land in Australia, and I'd like to pay my respects to traditional owners of this land and to elders past and present. And I'll also just mention it's after 11 p.m. in Australia, so my apologies if I'm a little bit slow on anything tonight. So next slide, please. So this quote here is from the 2021 UN Day of General Discussion. This quote struck me because it's not the first time that I've heard people talk about how things haven't really changed in child welfare. So wicked or complex problems are seen as impossible public policy issues at times. And today we'll hear about how care experienced young people can help us move from wicked problems to wicked solutions through collaboration and partnerships in research that move beyond seeing young people just as subjects of research. Next slide, please. In Australia, we have really limited national data sets on social indicators, and our data collections around outcomes for children and young people transitioning from care are almost non-existent. Our data sets and traditional indicators don't tell us everything. There's a move towards hearing more from people with lived experience of social services. This presentation is about what I've learned from working with care experienced young people in research settings over the last decade, and what I've learned from studying participation theory and from trying to promote care experienced people's participation in policymaking processes. Through my PhD on Careleavers and early parenting, I had a lot of practice in trying to design participatory research, and only to come up against various barriers in ethics processes and in recruiting young people through organisations and in recruiting any care leaver parents at all to participate in my study. But I did learn that many other studies also don't recruit so-called hard to reach populations. And the Australian government's begun to look into problems with the way that we measure national success and progress in Australia. And this quote here is from the Treasury of the federal government, acknowledging that much research is missing the people that we're often most concerned about. Next slide, please. So this recent study, the Australian Child Maltreatment Study, was just launched and revealed shocking levels of child maltreatment amongst Australians. It's a major and important study that will likely have a significant impact for Australian public policy. It was a sample size of 8,500 Australian adults, and it's regarded as a representative sample. The sampling method excludes many people, however. There's still many assumptions that gold standard quantitative research is superior to other forms of research, but this can't be true in voluntary participation studies based on samples that use mobile phone numbers. Next slide, thanks. So large national studies concerned with an entire country's population are typically content to survey people who fulfill this kind of criteria. They're often based on randomizing mobile phone numbers. So people have to have a mobile phone, and those people need to then want to talk to researchers. They need to be comfortable to answer personal questions from researchers. They need to be able to consent to be part of the research, and they need to speak the language that the survey is conducted in. So those are the people who can participate in apparently representative samples. And that means that we end up knowing a lot about these kinds of people, and we kind of assume that our country is made up of these people. We just go to the next slide. So what that means is that a lot of our public policy decisions are being made based on data from those people, and not based on people who don't have a mobile phone, who aren't allowed to talk because of abusive family members preventing them from doing so, people who don't want to talk to a researcher, people who are in jail, people who don't understand what research is, people who are children, people who have more pressing concerns or worries than participating in research, such as homelessness, trying to keep safe from violence, managing hunger, looking after children, dealing with grief, distress, mental illness and addiction. And a lot of people might feel too judged or surveilled to want to participate in research. And many people don't speak the language that the survey is conducted in. So all of these people are hardly reached by research. And yet it's these people who are often in the situations that many of our most complex social policy problem areas are. Next slide, please. So participatory research methodologies most resemble small-scale qualitative projects which are regarded usually as unrepresentative and unreliable. In the context of sampling methods employed in large-scale whole population studies, participatory research methodologies may actually increase the representativeness of hardly reached populations, such as Careleavers. And there are many participatory options which can be employed for projects large or small, or anything in between. Next slide, please. In our peer work models for transitions from care project at Monash, we found that there were at least all these kinds of peer employment roles, and peer support and peer mentoring are direct practice roles, and they're most typically associated with existing employment models. There's no reason, though, why employment for care experienced people to share their wisdom and experience can't take many other forms. So youth advisory bodies, youth councils, they're great entry-level roles for people who are new to research or advocacy and policy advising. Peer education and training roles are great ways for young people to start as well. We'll hear more about peer research when Mariana and Tatiana share their work. And in Australia, on the Monash University projects that I've coordinated, we've mainly engaged care experienced, lived experience consultants to work with us on different projects. Lived experience consultants are defined by me as highly experienced advisors and advocates, people who've been part of many, many projects in many capacities and who have lower support needs from researchers. We try to pay $100 per hour for short engagement project work, where it's just a couple of hours. For my current work on the real-time rights-based record-keeping governance project, we're offering reimbursement to lived experience consultants at $50 per hour for a series of workshops and ongoing project work, pending further funding. Next slide, please. So in thinking carefully about my research with care experienced parents, I tried to bring trauma-informed approaches together with participatory methodologies. Participation theory is really conceptually useful, but it's often oriented in a linear and progressive direction, which elevates some approaches above others. And this is without considering trauma-informed approaches necessarily, or the duty of research or consultation findings to reach influential audiences and to have an impact. From all of this thinking, I developed this adaptive participation model to assist research and consultation facilitators to assess their resources and develop their research and consultation strategies and designs accordingly. So if we just go to the next slide. So we're often at the whim of different funding bodies and strict grant terms and conditions, and we can't always do everything as we would want to. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to find ways of increasing opportunities for care experienced young people to participate in research and policy. We go to the next slide. So resource mapping, as I've termed it, it has 4 major considerations which affect your ability to provide participatory opportunities. So these are the length of time that you have for a given project. These are the staffing levels that you have on a project and the levels of funding that you have for project expenses, your existing relationships with or ability to engage care experienced young people you want to consult with or invite to be part of your research. That's 4 key resources, and figuring out where you sit in terms of how those areas are resourced will help you to make other decisions for an effective and pragmatic research design. We go to the next slide. Another key aspect of my own approach to research or consultation with care experienced young people is paying attention to how we ask questions and how we direct discussions. There's 2 modes of inquiry identified in the adaptive participation model. There's introspective inquiry and there's extrospective inquiry. It was really important in the Careleaver early parenting study because of surveillance bias issues and distrust that I asked participants for their expertise and not solely to focus on their potentially traumatic experiences. Ultimately, the 2 lived experience consultants engaged to be part of my PhD study, who were care experienced parents, they were asked to comment on existing research findings from my literature review and then the findings from my interviews and focus groups with care sector practitioners. So they had the last word on my study's findings, and I asked them with each question, was there anything missing? Did they want to add anything else? And the next slide, please. So for our Delphi study on education and out-of-home care at Monash, we engaged 4 lived experience consultants to participate in the study at 3 different time points. So we asked for a review of our survey design and a discussion of our first wave survey results and a discussion of our second wave survey results. And the 3 research assistants on this project ensured that we briefed the lived experience consultants on the project properly, how it was funded, what we were trying to achieve, why we were looking at education, and they were paid at the equivalent of $100 per hour as we wrote that amount into the grant application, and we were successful with that. Any ethics committee should be ensuring you have plans to manage conflict and distress or disclosures. As a practitioner researcher, I've had a lot of experience with this, but since I've focused on extrospective inquiry, I've also found that there's less conflict, distress or disclosures that have happened during research activities. And just moving on to the next slide. So finding an audience for young people's work is important for creating impact and for their work and recommendations being taken seriously and potentially implemented through policy reforms. A project's intended audience and likely audience should be communicated to young people when they're deciding whether or not to consent to participate to being part of a research project. And this shows commitment to doing something with what young people say. So just for the last slide. So that's a few examples of ways that we can incorporate participatory approaches in academic research. There are benefits in this for research representation and design, for care experienced co-researchers, academic institutions and more. And it's my opinion, based on this research, that increasing participation opportunities will help us to move from wicked problems to wicked solutions And I'll hand over to Mariana and Tatiana to tell you about what we can do when we really properly invest in young people's participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jade, and that was perfect timing. So thank you very much. We got a space now, actually, Jade, to answer some specific questions for yourself. So if there's anybody that has any specific questions for Jade, I think that would be great. I can see that Carly has made a comment in the chat saying that the point on extrospective inquiry is really important and often lost, especially when professionals, politicians have grown to expect the emotional experience of individual story.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to comment on that, Jade. Good, really important point.
Well, so I realised that when we had guests to some consultations that I was involved in, and young people would make a sort of not a minor disclosure, but they would say something about how things weren't that great, or something about something that happened to them. And then the guest person would quite rightly be very concerned and then ask them lots of questions about, oh, you know, that must have been really awful for you. I'm so sorry that that happened, which led to a deeper discussion of these kinds of traumatic experiences. And so that sort of led me to think about if we're focusing on what people think about things, then that's an advisory capacity. That's, you know, that's kind of putting your faith in someone's policy abilities and things like that without taking anything away from other experiences or things that they might have had. And people will still talk about themselves, but they're not necessarily going in really deep to those kind of problematic areas. I was really impressed when I looked up extrospective and found out it was a real word. That was one of the funnest moments for my thesis, I think. So.
No, it's really useful. It is a really useful approach, because if you think as a researcher, sometimes the challenge is, you know, this is a very relational exercise, isn't it? And you haven't got that necessarily. I mean, it's probably a bit different we'll hear in our following presentations. It's a bit different for people working in NGOs that have got maybe some of that relationship with the people that they're working with. But for academics, quite often it's you're coming in for a short period of time on a project. You've got to quickly build a relationship where you can and support where you can. But taking that approach, it becomes a little bit a little bit easier ethically with some of those complex issues that you've discussed.
Yeah, and being a social worker and having many years of experience working with young people, it's sometimes difficult for me to not be able to sort of see through assistance in a research capacity. So unfortunately, it's better not to set up those kinds of expectations or those kinds of reliances when you're not going to be able to be there, and you're gonna have to kind of shut those conversations down. It's not fun to do, but that's one way that I've found of working around it.
And one other point that struck me in your presentation is that thing about the need to be pragmatic and flexible in all of this. You know, often participatory research is, as I say, it's set up as that kind of ladder of participation, with co-production being a bit like the RCTs being the gold standard of research. And I think there's some complexity in some of that as well. And it'd be interesting to hear a bit more about your views on that. Should that be the case, that is the gold standard?
Well, I think sort of some of the issues that I found with that, and one of the reasons for doing the peer work models project, was that it's very difficult to have people be involved in a project that they're only getting paid for a couple of hours here and there. People have to find substantive employment, people have to study, people have other commitments. And you're usually doing events-based, you know, focus groups or things like that. You're trying to get everyone together at the same time. So I think, you know, if we're providing a stability of employment and a stability of income for young people, then it would make sense to be at that sort of youth-led end of things. But it's also where audience and influence comes in. So the pragmatic compromise, I suppose, is that you're more likely to to reach influential audiences through partnerships with government, through partnerships with other organisations. And they might have a tendency towards more tokenistic practices, which you might need to challenge. So I think there's different kinds of methods that will suit different kinds of situations, and you don't need to kind of aim for the stars if that won't work in your situation. You won't be achieving what you want to achieve, I don't think.
Yeah, that's really important point. Right, horses for courses, I guess, and yeah, what you can achieve in with the means that you have, definitely. Joe, Derek's put a question in the chat as well that you might want to answer in the chat, because I think we're going to have to move along, Jade. But it links to this, and it's about referring to remuneration and scales of payment. And asking, did you find that some people preferred alternative ways of receiving recognition for their involvement? Because it's a current discussion in Scotland around remuneration and
Right.
recognition. So Joe's interested in other people's experiences. So whether you've got a comment on that, Jade, or other people in the chat may well have a comment on that as well. So yeah, please keep the conversation on that one going in the chat, maybe.
All right, great.
Thank you, Jade. And so let's move along, because we've got quite a tight schedule today. So thank you, Jade. Really interesting presentation. So now we're going to hand over to Mariana Incanato. So Mariana is an activist working in the field of child rights and focuses on children in care and care leavers in Latin America. She has been involved in promoting the law that supports leaving care services that has been enforced in Argentina since 2017. And she is currently a consultant for various organizations such as UNICEF and an advisor to the legislature of the city of Buenos Aires. Mariana has developed several participatory research pieces, both at national and regional level. So I'm going to hand over to Mariana to talk about the project that did with mapping across Latin America. Thank you, Mariana. Over to you.
Gracias.
Thank you.
¿Me escuchan bien?
Can you hear me? Good. Thank you. Well, the first thing I want to thank the organization of this webinar, our allies in mapping and BCN. And briefly, before beginning, I want to tell you that this is the fourth participatory research that we're carrying on. The first one took place thanks to the training that we received from the University of York in 2015 with John Dixon, who is one of the first people to begin in these participatory research methodology. So we were able to begin in that type of research for the Latin American region. Next, please. Okay, so this slide, I'm going to present three elements that I believe are key to place in order what are we talking about when we're talking about participatory research. What do we need to know? What are the risks or the gaps of this participatory research, and how did we do it for Latin America in the mapping? I would like to say that a participatory research is much more than that. This methodology from civil society, those organizations that we carry it on, we know that the generation of evidence is very important so that we can advance in care reform. But also, academia should include in the processes the people that they want to study. This produces certain inequality because this methodology, in this case, the election of this methodology from civil society is strategic, but also political. For its implementation, we need a previous work that is to generate the conditions so that a collective can participate, so that they work on this research. And these skills are linked to building, on one hand, a discourse, a position that comes from the experience of the young researchers, and that, of course, are involved in the peer-to-peer. And on the other hand, the skills that they need to include in a working group that is professional with their own rules as a job. What do we need to know on the participatory research? We need to know that it's going to take more time, that the professional researchers has to present that technical information in a amicable, in a friendly way to the young researchers. It's also important to know that in that distribution of roles, that we have to give the young people the work that they have to do and that they feel prepared to do it. And last, we need to plan and to place it in a calendar, because those mixed groups are much more difficult to carry on because we need more coordination. But I insist, it's important to understand that these methodologies work when there's a previous youth group with an activism that is in an orderly and constant way. This way, we did it with a network of Latin America that has a young committee, a committee that has been working since 5 years ago with youth from different countries, and that were the main researchers that came on to this study, to this research. What are we looking in mapping? We need to know the activists in Latin America and the Caribbean that have some type of work, but are not recognized as such because of their context. So sometimes you're going to see in this slide that we have a working team that have 6 young people from Peru, Argentina, Guatemala, Ecuador, Argentina, and Bolivia, a central group and a coordination group in a sub-regional team. And I'm going to talk about this because Tatiana, my colleague, will talk about the results. Let's go to the next slide, please. Do you know that our region is very large and we have different languages, cultures, so we decided to divide in 3 subregions: Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean, the Andean, and the Southern Cone. Each of these subregions had a coordinator that worked with 2 young people within his team or her team. This meant that the central group would have a responsibility linked to training of those working in the research and also for the drafting of the final report. But much of the tasks that the young researchers carried on were the coordinators of the subregions were key to accompany and to support the field work. Let's go to the next slide. Let's go to the next one. I want to talk a little bit more about the profile. One more, please. Thank you very much. So, how were they selected? Those that participated and worked in this project. We began with the experience in similar work, autonomy, responsibility, and digital competencies. we made a call, an open call to receive requests within the Latin American network. And from 21, we selected 6 activists that I presented before, between 18 and 26 years of age. Some with previous research experience and advocacy and participation in forest, regional, global, regarding the care reform. For one of them, our dear Luis, it was his first paid job. Let's go to the next one. How did they participate in the project? First of all, they participated in the methodology design and validation of the data collection tools. They supported the field work and the systematization process. One was an interview, a survey, and then a focal groups to know a little bit more about the dynamic of the work. They were part of the analysis process, validated the results, and provided recommendations. And you will hear today that they are involved in the publication of the results of this research. Let's go to the next one. All the phases. And I want to say that I'm very proud to say that this is a participatory research that is complete, where the young researchers were able to participate in all the phases of the project, and that we have done it, fortunately, this way in all the research that Dancel has taken on. But in a very important way to show the participatory methodology between peers needs to be reviewed, that allows so that the field work will be able to discuss and the tools from their site of what their peers have said in the interviews. Let's go to the next one. Like I was saying, we defined a participatory peer-to-peer methodology with techniques, qualitative and quantitative. We took on training before going to field work and then follow up each week with all the team. Let's go to the next one. Like I said, I am not going to present the information on the results, but I want to say that the search for this team was very productive, and it was able to contact more than 160 key actors of 27 countries in the region. Not all of them activists, you will see now, who were activists, but I want to show you with this that it extends large the work that we were able to do thanks to the diversity of territories and to have a team work with representatives, young professionals of many countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. One more. A final reflection, because of course everybody wants to know what did we find in this mapping. A methodology, a participatory methodology guarantees inclusive process in academia. The research peer-to-peer has to become a practice as a way of designing research on care. Our experience with this methodology shows that with training, standardization, support, and payment, we can be able to see a perspective for research, especially qualitative, that make the data valid. Let's say that it is a methodology that allows us to build and to produce questions that are more appropriate, that generate better rapport and empathy with the people that are interviewed and reduce the risk of data that does not have the quality that we need. It is a path to strengthen the participation of Careleavers in the discussions on care reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you so much, and very well timed. We're keeping to our time schedule, which is fantastic, but a really interesting presentation. If I could just remind everyone at this stage, we're going to take questions after Tatiana's presentation, which is going to follow. We're going to take them together with Mariana's because it was based on the same project. So if people could start thinking of any questions that they have for Mariana and Tatiana as we go, so that we can move into the questions for them both after Tatiana's presentation. So yeah, that leaves me to introduce our last presentation, and we're really pleased to have Tatiana Lustig da Silva. She's a care leaver from the protection system in Argentina and an activist for the rights of children, adolescents and youth without parental care. Tatiana is the coordinator of the Youth Committee of the Latin American Network of Protection Careleavers, and also a student of social work as well, which is great to hear, at the University of Buenos Aires. And she's participated in the research that Mariana has introduced us to around the regional mapping. So thank you very much, Tatiana, for joining us today, and over to you for your presentation.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Justin. It's a pleasure to be here representing those that we worked on the mapping, the people we found in the mapping, and I hope I can comply with the time. And also greetings to everybody that is here from different parts of the world. And to add to my presentation, I am one of the founders of the activists here in Argentina. We have been working together for 10 years, and with this collective of actives of Careleavers, we were able to work in a law that involves the Argentinians that are Careleavers. So I am very proud to participate and show the work that we have with so much passion and continue to work for the improvement of the care in the region. To talk about this research, I would like to give you the results of the people that we found. The next one, please. What did we find then? We found the previous one, please. There we go. So the mapped activist, we were able to find 16 from an Andean, and from the South Cone. We were able to see that in Central America, we were only found in Mexico and one in Guatemala. And in the Southern Cone, the majority are from Argentina and 16 are from the Andean subregion. This generates two questions that we could follow up in other research, which is the Careleavers, what conditions the individual activists have a vision, medium or long term, so that they can become a formal group and to be able to grow in scope. If so, what do they need to do so? Even though there are limitations, because of this search, we were able to contact more than 160 key actors from 27 countries in the region. And what did we find? We found 49 individual activists 14 participate in organizations, groups, and networks of caregivers, and of 19 countries in Latin America and Caribbean. The next one, please. There we go. Okay, from this search, we were able to find three main types of actives: adults, professionals, or those working in formal work environments related to this topic. On the other side, young people with consolidated activism with formal individual or group participation with defined objectives and activities, and incipient young activists who recently began their activism and have no formal participation. Next, please. From that data collected, we can say that the Careleavers activism has gained exciting momentum in the last 10 years. It is very interesting to see that in the Andean region in 2012 and 27 in the Southern Cone, they increased significantly. And that's no coincidence, since interesting programs and projects aimed at adolescents and young people without parental care. Next, please. This is a result that is very important, that really called our attention when we began to validate the data. And that's 60% of those maps are currently studying. That is, we have to make an emphasis on the education of activists, because 77% have reached the university or tertiary level. And those who are not studying, only a small percentage, 5%, have not yet completed their high school or secondary school, depending on the country. It is important to make an emphasis that this situation contrasts with those educational situations of alternative caregivers in the region. According to recent local and regional studies, we can see that there are no access to education, lack of documents, the transfers that interrupt the education, and some expelling nature of some educational institutions, and the stigmatization that we face when we want to continue our studies. Also, access to higher education is restricted because in many cases, though the secondary or high school education didn't finish, or we don't have the economic resources to be able to have that university education. On this, I would like to make an emphasis, the importance, but also that we know that we are privileged to be able to reach this level of education, and there are those that cannot access because of the reasons that I've already mentioned. The next one, please. Continuing with the groups, the main characteristics that we found: gender is 53%, 71 are adolescents and youth, 73 are caregivers, and 14% are currently in the system. 23% are professionals, and only 18% receive payment for their tasks. We have more data of the characteristics of the activists, but we want to share the main characteristics. We also saw the learning peer-to-peer. So please read the report that is in English and Spanish to tell in detail the findings related to the motivations and meanings associated with activism, their projections and expectations for the future, where they hope to go, and what they need to be there. Read the complete report. Next, please. As Mariana mentioned, there is not just one way of doing activism, but they all aim to transform the child protection system of children and adolescents and hear their voices. And we will see how in the next slide, please. Okay, so activists do many types of work, and we work on many topics. Some we accompany voluntarily children and adolescents in the system or Careleavers. Some work in alternative care, look how to improve the time that children and adolescents spend their time separated from their families, sharing their experiences, giving advice, teaching music, and caring for them. Other are professionals working for children's rights, such as lawyers, pedagogues, and social works. Others organize into peer groups to support each other. Some organize community collections. Others may make visible the rights violations and advocate changing laws and policies. Some seek justice and compensation for violations that they suffered, or others in alternative care. Most activists focus on children without parental care and young people who are Careleavers, but from some, they also work with street children, refugees, migrants, LGBTIQ, and others, Afro descendants, or indigenous people. Activists also work with families at risk without any social protection. They also work with civil servants, educators, and workers in charge of alternative care for children and adolescents. Next, please. Good. We were able to identify different levels of intervention in the system from activist actions. They all aim to transform the protection system of children and adolescents based on their own experiences. There are micro actions that are oriented to direct attention, volunteering, and accompaniment of children and adolescents. These actions usually have little institutional links or large monetary resources available. At an intermediate level, actions to improve some system aspects or to implement formal programs, among other objectives. There are also actions that have some resources and usually link with other key actors in the system. At the macro level, their actions are directly aimed at transforming the system through advocacy on the public agenda, and even in some cases within the system, working in that system. As people's experience grow as activists, so does their participation in different macro actions. Micro actions such as direct attention to children and adolescents continue to be present among the most consolidated activisms, although in some cases it does decrease slightly. There is a transformation in the expectations of activism. It starts from the desire to help someone in an unfavorable situation and whom they know from first hand. And then they also seek to transform that reality beyond specific help. Next, please. Something that is very important that we ask the activists, what are they experts in, and that we can share with other organizations. They had a lot to share on how they worked with children and adolescents in transition from accompaniment of those that live in alternative care and talk. Some have ways of of being able to share their life experiences. We also have caregivers that are experts in communication, technology, and even music. This is important because in the database, you're going to find information. Where are they and what they want to share? So when you start working on your projects, you can look for partners and consult the experts. Next, please. Okay. Next, please. Next one. I'm looking for barriers of participation. It's number 16. There we go. Okay, we can leave that one. Okay. Why do activists do what they do? Well, first, we found well-being. Those activists concerning the personal satisfaction and desire that motivate their actions. Activism generates a sense of well-being and enjoyment. They do it because they like it and they feel motivated and they have personal desires. In addition, the well-being they seek to extend returns, making them feel better. On the other hand, we find a compensation in the life stories, transforming the experiences they went through into something more meaningful and rewarding as a personal process and a collective process. We find group activism, they find a support security, confidence, and freedom of expression, and a great focus on empowerment where people go from vulnerability to where they find that they can change the lives of others. Next, please. Yes, Justin, I know I'm right on time, right? Okay, you're here to say, okay, time. So to reach a closing, it's important to acknowledge the emotional burden of activists working on a topic that is so close to their hearts. Oftentimes, they suffered stressful or traumatic situations, and to make every effort to remain alert and sensitive to the mental care of caregivers. It's important to give resources for their emotional well being, supervision, accompaniment, and collaboration. Next one, please. Okay, as main obstacles, mentioning real quick, we find multiple obstacles. The main one is lack of economic and material resources. We also found barriers in the institutions, children and adolescents that participate, and also public policies and the consequences of what happens when they are caregivers and limits such as to have low difficulties contacting others and a lack of they recognize that harmful effects of residential care as limiting factor in the participation. As I was saying, discrimination, stigmatization, and feeling of shame, and many don't have the time because this limits the sustainability of their actions. It's important to have funding for activism. It's very complex, and those resources are given to those formal organizations, but the activists that are in a collective and they find the funds necessary than those individual activists. However, in all these individual activists that want to participate in organizations, they find that the funding is low or others like, for example, institutional barriers, we find lack of interest and lack of support, and the policy makers and their right to participate in those topics that affect them. Next, please. To be closing, we want to share some recommendations on this report. They are detailed in the report that we will be sending. A recommendation to the states that the guarantee the rights of children and adolescents in and out of alternative care, the civil society, they receive the support. And that is so important that we can support these young groups in the development of peer groups in the space so that they can organize and meet. And to the activists that are present in this webinar, remember that we have experience and important knowledge to share. Our participation improves within the care system, and we're together in this cause. We know that networking, that we can learn from each other and to share our life experience can be very enriching to promote our activism. It's not enough to go through the system. We have to have the time and to be able to act. And so we propose a school of activism so that we can consider the experiences of those maps. So thank you for your time, for being here, and we invite you to read the report both in Spanish and in English. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tatiana. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. It's such an excellent presentation. Fantastic. Really great. And thank you, Mariana, too. So I just got a couple of questions for you. That we've got some questions actually that we'll keep for the wider panel when Jade joins us as well. But just a question that came to mind for me, Mariana, in particular, while you were talking, I can see this approach has a real fit with the ethos of your organization, you know, that rights-based approach and working in a kind of emancipatory way with people. And I can see that there's a real fit with your work there. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on, and I can see why that's important to undertake participatory research because of that underpinning values that you have. But I'm just wondering what did the participatory approach have in terms of enhancing your findings? And it's a question for Tatiana as well. So what was it that, that the approach did to your findings? How did it improve your research in any ways?
Perdón. Justin, no entiendo muy bien
Sorry, I didn't understand very well the question. Maybe I'm missing some kind of information, but would you please reformulate your question?
Yeah, I guess what did this participatory approach do to improve the research findings? What was the benefits of adopting a participatory approach? Why was it better to have peer researchers undertaking the research than employing somebody off the street to go and do research, or somebody at a university? What were the real benefits of it?
Gracias.
Thank you. Well, in all researches, Doncel had a partner, and it was an academic partner. And in the history, the researches were not made only by Doncel, but the partners were the faculty, the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences, UNICEF, and also the University of Buenos Aires, and some other partners, and they allowed us to work by validating the different instruments, the methodologies, with a team of professional researchers of the university. And I believe that's important to mention because it was a group work. This research allows to the academic researchers to learn no new methodologies of how to work the research and to create evidence. And as I was explaining, we have a huge gap when the academia produced the subject they are trying to teach and explain, and the methodology of getting that explanation in the real life of those people and the change that research can produce, because we are living in a huge inequality, and that inequality is seen when we create the research, and this type of research actually reduces that inequality, because finally we can see the design of what we are trying to get from the field. It is absolutely different. What is the effect we can have in a young person who is receiving that survey from a person who was actually living, who lived that experience? And that doesn't have any comparison, because we know that the effects an interview has, especially it's different when you feel a good rapport, and obviously being comfortable with a person. And also it gives an added value when we have a data analysis. When professional researchers develop the first analysis of data and they present it to young people, they can actually acquire the data because they understand that it passed from the lived experience on the field. And that is a production of new debates, discussions about the responses given by the different people who answered the surveys. And again, I am telling you, it gives a new political position on research. And actually the support is given by the field work we are doing, as Tatiana explained it. And it actually gives a more clarity for the activists to work. It creates more advocacy, especially in people who is trying to discuss this kind of topic today.
That's great. Thank you, Mariana. Yeah, I mean, there's such a case for about improving the quality by being able to check assumptions that might be being made by researchers as well, by having that lived experience to check out any kind of themes that might come from the data analysis that can be checked by people's lived experience. It's a really useful part of a quality in terms of improving the data analysis. There's a couple of questions for Tatiana. The first one I have for Tatiana is if she wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit about what the experience was like for you as a youth researcher, and what were the benefits for you to be involved in the project personally, and any skills or knowledge that you acquired from being involved in the project.
Well, as I commented, this is my second research. And the difference that I see with the first research is that now I felt a little more empowered with more tools, and I could even give a little bit more from me. And Mariana was creating some kind of discussion, analysis of data, and you could see actually the difference in the quality of research, in the quality of interviews, when the other person knows that you are a Careleaver they give an actual and valid answer. And this creates a new perspective, especially because it is not the same to know that other people that didn't have the experience will write about us. But when they have had the experience, they are writing with us. And that is actually giving a different perspective, not only for the new people, it is also for us, the researchers. It actually creates a limit on a before and after. And in my activist, it has created a different perspective because now I have so many roles in the Latin American Red. I am member of the youth group, and I am also a coordinator now. And the experience that I have had with this research, it has been rich. And besides learning, besides giving, you are learning even more when you work with professionals because you made them understand how complex it is and also the power that you give to that research. That is there, that doesn't have comparison.
Thank you, Tatiana. Jade, I don't know if you want to join back in now with the conversation. There's one more question that's kind of aimed at Tatiana, but it would be interesting to know other people's opinions on this question as well. And I hope it translates well, this question, because it is a very good question. And that is, how do you protect those with lived experience in your network from their passion being co-opted by local services, leaders, politicians, perhaps for their own agenda? So how do you protect the peer researchers involved in projects from not having their passions and I guess their narratives, their life stories from being co-opted by potentially politicians? Mariana, Tatiana, sorry, did you have a...
Perdón, es una pregunta.
Okay. Is the translation catching up with me?
Bueno, a ver, no solo la investigación, pero también el activismo.
Well, it is not only in research, it only includes the activism. Because, you know, the activism strengthens the life of people who is actually being the activist. They have a little more self-esteem, they are more free, and we can say it's difficult that an activist wouldn't realize that someone is trying to co-opt him, her, of a different message. And these people has developed a self-trust. And actually, they can realize that the activism actually empowers them because they actually exercise the participation right. And when they are performing their rights, they become self-esteemed on those rights. Is that an answer to your question? And I would like to add something else, my personal experience to this. And now, being in the protection system, we can see that, for example, there are people who are trying to work because that is their call, because we care them. And those people, actually, we are important. And we see the difference to other people who see us only as a number. And we realize when somebody is inviting us only to be part of the picture, for example, or for example, they want to invite us just because they want to hear our voice. But when we become expert, we realize about it. And I believe that's why it is important to have other people as part of our activism exercise, because I believe that when you start from the ground and without any base, any foundation, sometimes maybe you can get confused, and it can be difficult for you to make a differentiation of your activism. And that's why when we could see that through the interviews, it is important to accompany those people. And that's why it is important to have that activism school.
Really interesting. Thank you both. Yeah. And I mean, sometimes these things can be through miscommunication or a question of having to learn more about people with a care experience. There might be people you're engaging with that just don't have that awareness or experience as activists as well. So yeah, it's really great that you've got that kind of open approach to educating and challenging where appropriate too. That's fantastic. Jade, I wondered if you had any thoughts from your kind of work trying to engage policy actors. I know in Australia you have the Create Foundation that do a lot of work as a peak kind of advocacy body in terms of advocating for young people at an individual but also systemic level. I wondered if you have much involvement with them, for example, in some of the work that you do on a policy level.
Yes, so that is a really good question. So my answer was going to be that most young people working in these sorts of areas and roles in Australia would have been through the Create Foundation Speak Up training. And if not that, then they'll be part of another group which has got a serious training program around advocacy and having previously worked for the Create Foundation running the Speak Up program many years ago. There's components about media training, there's components about boundaries, there's components about, you know, recognising the sorts of things that you're talking about in terms of being taken advantage of, perhaps. So I think a lot of it is in the work that you're doing, always just kind of informing people about the way that systems work and that, well, I mean, as Tatiana said, that young people are very good at reading people and can work these things out. But as practitioners, we also have that insight into the sort of systems levels and the different things that practitioners and managers and organisations complain about and all those sorts of things too. So you can always pass on some of that knowledge to young people so that that rounds out the kind of understandings of how things all work together. I think that there's different ways of looking at that sort of co-option as well, because a lot of people can use that to their own advantage. So it is perhaps a bit paternalistic at times for people to jump in and try to say they're taking advantage of you, they're taking advantage of you. So I think it's good to have an eye out if you're working with people, but also I fall on the overcautious side a lot of the time. So most people say that they don't need that kind of level of paternalism and that sort of thing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a balance, and I guess it comes down to one of the threads that I noticed kind of throughout the presentation about ethics in this form of research. Really, I think it's an important point for us to discuss as a panel, perhaps, that, you know, there's so much going on here in terms of kind of relational approaches and reflexive approaches where we're supporting young people through the process, and it goes way beyond filling out, you know, Jade and I at a university would have to fill out an ethics form, and sometimes people see that as ethics done. But what's really important in this is that ethics is just a process and practice throughout the whole of the projects, and that came across really strongly in the work that Jade was talking about with the introspection and extrospection, the great word of the day. And also, you know, the work that Mariana and Tatiana were talking about in the fact that the projects were building on each other as well. These weren't one-off projects. These are ongoing pieces of participatory research with young people that are trained by university staff as well and working alongside university staff. There's some real kind of good gold standards of ethical practice, I would say, being demonstrated here today. So yeah, that's an area that I figured we could discuss a little bit more, but I'm just looking at other questions that are coming into the chat. And one of these is about what expectations do you have regarding the instances of the results of these research initiatives in the creation of public policies that propose concrete transformation, both in institutions and in discharge? Is it possible to think about the participation of adolescents and young people in the design of these policies? So that's one question. So the question is really around designing projects that can help with care reform programs as well as is an element that somebody's raised as well. So how can we do these kind of participatory projects to help with children in institutions and moving out of institutional care? Is there any experiences that you may have in those fields, in those areas?
I just want to give Tatiana and Mariana a chance to answer, but certainly in my state in Victoria, there's many initiatives that work like that.
Over to you, Tatiana.
Bueno, con mucho orgullo puedo mencionar.
Well, I'm proud to say that we have a law, is a new law that created the program of accompaniment for Careleavers. And I could say that it is needed to have the population who we are focusing this public policy. It was a great experience. I believe that this was the origin in the region for many others, and this law was adopted in many countries because I believe that it is especially for the people who had the experience in the system, and from our own experience, we can say what is needed. For example, 5 years ago, I received a message from a young person, and her life was totally changed at that moment thanks to that accompaniment that she was receiving. And I remember very well that I was rushing in my errands, and when I received that message, I was crying because I could see the material aspect of all that activism, all that huge work. Sometimes we believe that is a work of an ant, but actually, in my experience, sometimes you don't understand it. And sometimes you say, okay, I'm going from this place to another place. I'm trying to speak. I'm giving my opinion, but what is the purpose of it? And sometimes you see how those little steps are creating that huge cascade. And it was also happening in the Latin American network. There is a lot of people doing great work in their regions. And when we put together all those pieces, when we create that big map and we create that articulation, we see the maximization of the efforts, and we believe it is needed to have the right people. It is feasible, we can do it, and it is necessary to create interest, the desire to work all together, the desire to be uncomfortable, because it's a real thing. Sometimes when we speak about the system, we just critique that the system is not it's not working, and we know that there are a lot of professionals, people in the government, but they have the difficulty to understand why things were not working properly. And that's why you have to give opportunities to open the discussions, round tables, to give the opportunity to other voices. And I believe that it is important to believe that for anyone, for people in the power, for ourselves, to go back to our history, to try to confront others And it is a big challenge, but a challenge that we see that works enough because we can change lives.
Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you so much.
Gracias, Tatiana.
We've come
Gracias por
to
lo que nos estás contando.
a bit of
Sorry.
towards the end of the webinar now, so we're just going to have to start closing off. People will need to be getting back to their day jobs in some respects, I'm sure. So I hope that this webinar has really made you think about some of the challenges and opportunities when undertaking participatory forms of research. You know, we have 80 years of research showing the challenges in the care system, particularly around institutional care studies, and they've been really vital pieces of research that kind of have underpinned a lot of those reforms and action plans, and you know, the UN guidelines on alternative care as well. But I think what we've seen here today, and Tatiana and Mariana and Jade have demonstrated, is that there's also space for research that has got this kind of lived experience at its core, and that participation at its core. And it's a real space where we can develop a body of research that can complement those other research studies that we already have, and it has real potential to influence and impact policy actors, but also practitioners in different ways, but in powerful ways. And I hope that you've picked that up today, particularly from Tatiana's presentation at the end there as well, which is really powerful. So it's been a great starting point, as I say, to explore participatory research on this platform. And it just leaves me to say that we'll be sending out an email with links to the recording and the slides and the resources. So if I would like to kind of encourage people to join the global collaborative platform, and if there are any researchers or PhD candidates, professors or researchers in NGOs, do join the Evidence for Impact Working Group as well. It's chaired by Marinus and Marion, and there are subgroups working on different areas of research as well. So again, thank you all very much, and let's give a virtual round of applause for the presenters, but also the translation team, and also Florence and Margot at the Better Care Network for organising the space for us to discuss this topic of participatory research with Careleavers. So thank you all very much, and we hope you all have a good day. Thank you.